Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 74 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by first-time guest, friend of the show, Claire de Lune. She is a writer and reporter for The Guardian. She is also a musician. Claire, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here because this is one of my favorite podcasts. No smoke blowing. Like I actually am a religious Buha's Block listener. So I was telling you before we started taping, I feel like I'm breaking the fourth wall by like entering the dimension of one of my favorite podcasts. So I'm really excited.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And it's long overdue, but we are doing it now. Yes. And we have a big one today because it is the state of the Lakers. This is my 10-game check-in every 10 games or so, looking at the big storylines over that chunk of the season. I like to break things into 10-game increments, like to kind of just get the pulse of what's going on with the team. And looking back at this stretch, I find this kind of hilarious because this stretch started with the Minnesota, Miami, and Atlanta losses, and then it ended with Memphis, Sacramento twice, Golden State on Christmas. So it's like there's been the highs and the lows of the Lakers all in one 10-game stretch of it looking like they were giving up on JJ Redick and just kind of the season. And then now they've had some of their best wins of the season, the spirited Christmas win, really Christmas classic in San Francisco. Just before we get into the 10 different storylines, what are your general thoughts on this 10-game stretch or so and just some of the roller coaster ride that we've seen with this group?
I think roller coaster is the perfect way to describe it. I think, and AD said something like this earlier in the season, like some nights they look like they can't beat anyone and some nights they look like they could beat anyone, So I think that's still true. I will say, I feel like I haven't been able to enjoy the actually kind of crazy impressive, like defensive turnaround, considering that they made no personnel changes really besides just changing the starting lineup. And yet now they have like, I think a top 5 or 10 defense like consistently over the last couple weeks because their offense has been right around 28 through 30 during that time. So I feel like that's pretty emblematic of just how the season's gone. It's like, I know JJ said something about whack-a-mole earlier in the season as well, but it's like they fix one problem and another problem sprouts up in its place. Like someone comes back from injury, someone else gets injured in their place. Like it does feel like they're putting out fires pretty much constantly.
I would also point to the roster and them having a lot of one-way guys and guys who affect one side of the ball. And then you see the numbers kind of reflect that they're not impacting or maybe negatively impacting the other side. And that brings us to the famous 30-game mark. And this was the point of the season that Lakers Vice President of Basketball Operations and General Manager Rob Pelinka pointed to at Media Day, that he wanted to see what this group looked like at the 30-game mark. So they are 17-13. They are 6th in the Western Conference. And I think you can poke some holes in that if you really wanted to be a skeptic or a nitpicker in terms of the negative point differential, the negative net rating on the season. Their offensive and defensive rating aren't great. But I think this group has shown that, AD's putting up some career numbers or at least career numbers by his Lakers standards in several categories. LeBron has looked much better over the last couple of weeks, which we will touch on. And I think with a 6 to 18 month window with those two and likely 18 months, I think it's time to put the picks on the table, time to go for it. And we had a report just yesterday coming off of the Christmas game by ESPN that the Lakers are willing to put their picks on the table. And they cited 3 first-round picks. And before we get into this, I just wanted to clarify something. So technically, yes, the Lakers have access to 3 first-round picks, 2029, 2030, and 2031. But due to the Stepien rule, they can only trade 2 of those picks. And if they were to trade 2 of those picks, it would have to be the 2029 and 2031 picks. So you can technically say the Lakers are willing to trade any of those three, which means they have access to 3 picks, but at most they can trade 2 first-round picks. So if we want to touch on De'Aaron Fox or any of the other players that could be available ahead of the February 6th trade deadline, at most, the Lakers have access to trading 2 of those first-round picks, not 3. So I've seen some confusion on the timeline about how many picks they actually have, what's the access to them. So it's 2. Now, they do have 3 first-round pick swaps, 2026, 2028, and 2030. And technically, they could pick swap more than 3 if they aren't trading those picks. But if we're saying like what's the maximum number of assets, if they're putting both picks in any trade, they would then have access to 3 picks to pick swap and then 5 second-round picks. So getting a little bit in the weeds with the picks, but I just wanted to clarify that because I've seen a lot of confusion and misinformation on that. They also technically can trade the first 4 picks of the 2027 pick that they owe Utah, and potentially even back to Utah to just give them the full first round pick if they wanted to. But wanted to clarify that just because, again, I've seen a lot of chatter about that. But realistically, any team that trades with the Lakers is going to be asking, if they are asking for a first, if it's a trade that merits one, they're going to want the 2029. They're going to want the sooner pick. So realistically, I think the 2029 is the one that is most likely to be traded, and then potentially the 2031 if they are doing 2 in the same deal or 2 separate deals. But with all that said, I think that the most interesting question to me is like, are they going to use both picks? In conversations I've had with people around the league, it often comes back to like, are they actually going to put both on the table in a serious way and potentially use both? And is there anything out there that's actually worth it? Because I don't know if any player outside of De'Aaron Fox that's currently on the market warrants 2 first-round picks. I have yet to see a name that really does, especially now with Jimmy Butler off the table. And as you see it, like, do you see a move or a series of moves that would elevate the Lakers to that, let's say, tier 2 contention? And do you think they should put both picks on the table in a serious way?
Yeah, well, first of all, they absolutely should use both picks. I mean, it's kind of silly to me that we're even still talking about this. Like, it feels like the can just keeps getting kicked down the road as to why both picks aren't being used. I remember last year, the party line was like, well, we're saving them so that we can put them all together to get a star. And, before that, it was like, well, we have so many injuries and we won't know until we have everybody back. So I feel like, through the 30 games, the Lakers have shown they are not where they need to be, but they have the nucleus that warrants improvement, and that on any given night they can beat any team. They just obviously need help, and it's in glaringly, apparent areas in the roster where there are holes. So first of all, I would use both picks. To your point on a previous episode, I think you said, like, what's the point of having LeBron James and Anthony Davis playing at this level if you're not going to invest in them? Like, do one or the other. I would be in favor of splitting up those 2 picks onto 2 different moves. I agree with you that I don't see a superstar or anyone available, or even just like a star available, that I think would help them enough with kind of using both those bullets on one person. So I would definitely be in favor of, using one in one transaction and one in another, but I would definitely use both. I mean, not use both just to say that you did, but I think that the roster needs enough improvement that both picks are warranted.
That's my point. Like, it's you can get into the weeds and like the semantics with it, but I just view it as like, if you are willing to put both picks on the table seriously, you can get in conversations for just about any player. And again, I don't think there's anyone that warrants both first round picks necessarily. But even if you're willing to put a first on the table, I think there are a lot of role players that are going to go for less than a first. And if you are willing to consider a first or even a lottery protected first, that gets you in the conversation at least. And then you have to figure out the contracts and the matching salary and then if there's any additional draft compensation in that. The 2 names that I really like that I've been bringing up are Walker Kessler and Cam Johnson. And I think if there was a way to get both of those guys, Johnson is a little tricky because of he's got some incentives in his contract that The outgoing salary would be $27 million. Basically, it would count as like for the Nets, it would be like sending out $23 million. And for the Lakers, it'd be like taking in $27 million. So Lakers would have to send out matching salary to the dollar, if not more, to get to that 27 plus million. But then the Nets would be technically taking on money, and they're right up there under the luxury tax in the first apron. So you might need a third team to facilitate a Cam Johnson trade. There's a way, I guess, you could do like a 3-team trade with Utah and Brooklyn, and you send JHS and maybe a minimum guy to Utah. You get back Walker Kessler. You obviously send them a pick, maybe even a second or 2 seconds. Maybe you remove the top 4 protection on that 2027 pick. And then to Brooklyn, you could send D'Lo, you could send Rui, and then probably Gabe, what would be the second contract there. I would try to keep Rui, and I would probably try to make it D'Lo and Gabe, and then a first and like probably a second or something. So like there are ways to like, I think that would substantially improve the roster. If the
those
outgoing,
are the 2 names I would go for as well. I think those are like the 2 glaring needs, is like, an athletic backup big who you could even maybe play alongside AD if you wanted to do a 2 big lineup, which has worked really well for the Lakers in the past, even though JJ seems pretty hesitant to do that. And then Cam, which is I think their biggest need, which is like a wing, a big athletic wing who can score, which he can. So I think those
having a career year, like 19 points a game,
incredible. Yeah,
over 40% from 3 with on like 7 attempts a game. And then I think, you probably go AD, LeBron, Cam Johnson, Max, Austin, and then your bench is Kessler, Vando when he comes back, which we'll see. Dalton Connect, and the backup guard spot backup point guard spot is then a question mark, but you are potentially shedding an extra contract in either the 2 separate deals, or if it's a 3-team, it gets 2 agreed upon things that ultimately get kind of looped into a 3-team deal. You are then creating a roster spot that you could go sign Markelle Fultz or Dennis Smith Jr. or even Lonnie Walker, who's not really a point guard type, but I think at least gives you some juice off the bench. So we should probably have the De'Aaron Fox conversation quickly. So ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported today on the Hoop Collective podcast that a lot of chatter now about De'Aaron Fox and his potential availability. And he said he's heard the Lakers as a team linked to Fox because of the clutch, the clutch representation there. My quick thought on it is just like, I feel like, sure, I think the Lakers would love De'Aaron Fox, but my 2 questions with it are one, is their max offer enough compared to what other teams, like Houston's been another popular one, San Antonio, and I just think those 2 teams can probably outbid the Lakers if they are really serious and competitive with a De'Aaron Fox offer. And then 2, let's just say they make a Godfather offer. Do they still have enough to, because I think like 3 guys I reported on that the Lakers kind of view in their inner circle outside of LeBron and AD are Austin Reaves, Dalton Connect, and Max Christie. And I think if I'm Sacramento, I'm asking for all 3, if not at least 2 of those 3. And if I'm the Lakers, especially looking at Austin, I'm sure I can hear some fans saying, oh, well, of course I'd give up Austin for De'Aaron Fox. And that would obviously be an upgrade, but you got to think about who else is still there that he's playing with. So De'Aaron Fox making like $35 million. If it's Austin, I mean, they might ask for Rui too, depending on I think I don't know what Sacramento would want in terms of, are they rebuilding now? Are they trying to like have like a soft rebuild and stay competitive because they still have Sabonis and DeRozan? Is it just like a fire sale? Like, I don't know what Sacramento does in that case, but I think if I'm the Lakers, I try and keep Austin just to keep as much talent as possible. I think I'd like Austin in the backcourt with him.
Yeah, I can't imagine a version of a Sacramento to Lakers, specifically like those 2 teams interacting trade, where Sacramento doesn't just like take the kitchen sink from the Lakers and just rob them blind. Like, I would imagine that the Lakers would probably be like absolutely bottom of their list of teams they'd like to send their best player to. So if people want to talk about like a, you know, mythical Lakers tax, I think this would probably be the scenario where it would be most likely to exist. And that being said, like, if you can't retain any level of depth to get a third star, I think if you've learned anything from the last few years of the NBA and like who wins a championship, like the 3-star build with no depth is just a really outdated model that doesn't really work anymore, because I think every single team has some level of top end talent. And so then when you look at the rest of the roster, you need like at least a 6 or 7 man rotation that you can trust. And the Lakers are already running real low on that. So I think for me, I would prefer high end, like shoring up the, I would say like 4 to 6 spots in the rotation and getting more talent there versus cashing in all the chips for one third star in this specific model of the Lakers. I mean, I think in the post LeBron era, obviously you're going to need a second star next to Anthony Davis. But if you're trying to contend for a championship this year with this nucleus, I think to me, there are other issues that would be more easily addressed without just like decimating the depth.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, if they could keep Austin in honestly one of Max or Dalton, like, if there was a way to keep 2 of those 3 guys,
that would be great. I just don't see how that's possible.
You give up. I would give up like, if I'm the Lakers, I would give up 2 firsts. I would give up the pick swaps
for sure,
or at least a couple of them. I would give up, second round draft capital, like whatever they want to make that work. Cause I do think De'Aaron Fox would be a really good fit with AD longer term and could, they've wanted that guy to take the pressure off of LeBron in terms of like that's been the elusive primary ball handler that they've been looking for. I think Austin has looked more comfortable in that role and played pretty well in that role recently. But of course, De'Aaron Fox is at a different level. I think he's arguably a top 20 player in the NBA. So I get it, but I think you also have to think about like, what does that, like if it's, you could do, he's making 35 million. So it's, if you do D'Lo, Gabe and, kind of match, like you can kind of get there with not, and you're replacing those guys with an actual like all-star level point guard.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but I'm highly skeptical of, to your point, it was just in Sacramento for a couple of road games, and in the pregame intro video for the Kings, they have Doug Christie punching Rick Fox in the face. So I can say I've never seen,
just sums it up. Yeah.
I've never seen a player punching another player in a pregame intro video in an arena. So I think that says enough about how the Kings feel about the Lakers. But
I don't see a universe where they don't want Austin in that trade. I guess
the one maybe thing with Austin would just be like, what's their direction? Because if they're trying to stay competitive, I think Austin makes a lot of sense. If they're trying to rebuild, then they probably demand though like Max and Dalton in addition to the matching salary. So I'd be open to it depending on the price and picks and stuff. I'd be all in if I'm them. It's just, I think you got to think about like, what does the roster look like with the leftover pieces, right? If you could keep Austin, I consider it. If not, I think you're kind of just decimating the top end talent on your team. But I think it's time to have the LeBron conversation. So this to me is storyline number 2. Also part of this 10-game stretch is LeBron taking a hiatus, we'll say, a little bit of a break. And since then, he's come back and looked rejuvenated. So over this 10-game stretch, he's leading the team in scoring, which he was not doing over the first previous 20 games. 25.8 points on 50, 36, 78 shooting splits. I think he's been much more engaged defensively. I think that's one of arguably the biggest benefit we've seen from him coming back. Lakers are actually better with him on the floor, which was not the case over the first 20 games or so, as many people have written and talked about the on-off and plus minus. So they are currently 2.4 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor in terms of on-off summary, and 10.6 points per 100 possessions better offensively, which is a huge mark, but then 8.2 points per 100 possessions, worse defensively. So you see wild swings on both sides of the ball with LeBron out there. But what have you seen from LeBron since returning from his hiatus?
I mean, I think he looks awesome. And he looks a lot more like the player that was making me shake my fist at the sky of them not making a move this summer or at last trade deadline. Because I think, from basically the post All-Star break through the Olympics, both AD and LeBron were playing like top 10 caliber player in the league level. And it was just maddening to me. Sorry, that wasn't enough to make them make a move. But then to your point, I know you've said this before, like the way LeBron was playing in the beginning of the season, it was like, oh no, this is going to give them the perfect excuse to be like, well, LeBron has declined, so I guess it's not worth it anymore. And, I think LeBron is smart enough to know that he needs to also give them a reason to make a move, or that's what it's going to take for them to improve the roster. And it seems like he just was like, I need a week to like collect myself and like, go in a hyperbaric chamber or whatever he does when he's rejuvenating his body and come back, ready to tackle this weird normally non-important stretch of the regular season like it's the playoffs. I mean, he's really had that level of focus and intensity. I don't know how sustainable that is, but if that's what it takes to get him some help, then I'm all for it. And he looks amazing.
He's not going to get 9 days off very frequently over the course of the rest of the season. But yeah, I mean, I think we've seen him return to form offensively. I think he's looked much more like the player he was last season, which was a player who was in that top 10 conversation and all NBA second team conversation. So I think that when we talk about the trades and like investing in this group, I think LeBron is applying some pressure here with his play. Whereas earlier in the season, as you were alluding to, like I was kind of saying, well, now they kind of have the loophole here of they could say, well, LeBron, like they do. I mean, realistically, unless they are trading for De'Aaron Fox, they need LeBron to be at least a top 20, if not top 15 type guy to have any shot at doing anything. And that also is assuming AD's being a top 10, if not top 5 guy. So like they need a certain level of LeBron. And I don't think he's quite been at that level consistently enough this season. Like he's still been an all-star level guy. He's still been a really, really elite player, especially when factoring in the workload, the age, all that stuff. But he has slipped a bit in some areas. I would say, especially defensively in terms of his consistency with effort and engagement. But in the shooting, he had that infamous now sort of shooting slump that was the worst since his rookie season. But I think he's looked much better. And like I thought, really the Christmas game, it was like vintage LeBron. And I don't know how much of that had to do with playing the Warriors and Steph or had to do with the Christmas stage and him knowing how many eyeballs were going to be on the game. But he was in his bag in terms of just posting up, dissecting the floor, finding cutters and shooters, playing bully ball, getting to the rim, had 31 and 10. And like from a statistical perspective, maybe wasn't his best, it was not his best performance of the season just from like the raw numbers, but I thought was arguably his most impactful, in that conversation of like best, like pure game of the season. Cause I also thought defensively, he was rotating out to Steph and challenging him, switching, just covering a lot of ground defensively. So he still has his fastball. It might not be as consistent as it once was, but you just need to get him into the playoffs really and give him a chance to figure out an opponent's weakness and how to attack them. And he can still do it, I think. So
the playoffs
now, can he do it next season? That's where like needs to be the urgency, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's so important to differentiate too. Like, I don't think people, obviously there's a lot of sort of stigma that comes with playing in the play-in, but for me, I'm more concerned about like a winner take all, like win or go home game. That's an exhausting way to start the playoffs. There's a reason we don't start the playoffs with a game 7, and to have to play 1, maybe 2 of those before you even start a first round series, that's a big deal, especially at 40. So I think it's not just getting into that play-in, but it's like, how do you stay out of the play-in? How do you get to a point where you can have that week of rest before the playoffs start? So I think that what they should be targeting is like what we have to accomplish to get the best out of LeBron this year is like we have to be a 6 seed or above. And that should be the goal, I think. But yeah, he looked
Which they
amazing
currently
on
are.
Christmas. Yeah, I know, which they currently
And
are, like by the skin of their teeth.
I was gonna note this earlier, and you could always kind of cherry pick certain games
Yeah.
to affect a record, but they're 2 game-winning shots away from being 19 and 11, which looking at the standings, they'd be tied with Dallas for 4th right now. And Dallas is about to be trending down with no Luka for a month plus. So
Yeah.
it's like, and again, the counter would obviously be, they just had a game winner in Golden State. I think that the Sacramento game, getting the offensive rebound, it was kind of not like a fluke play, but sort of just like a
Lucky in a way, yeah.
Yeah, like you could always kind of make the replay the endings of games and sort of whatever. But they were very close to being 19 and 11.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, if they're tied for 4th in the West right now, I think we're banging on the table saying like, make some trades. Like,
Yeah, seriously.
Unless, but it also like they're kind of in a sweet spot, I think, because you could also say if they were like 3rd in the West or something,
Like,
they
we're
could
fine.
maybe
We
say,
don't need
well,
trades.
it's all
Yeah.
working. We don't need to make a move. So I think it's clear that they need to. But
Yeah.
let's go to the next storyline, which to me is the new starters. So it feels like the Lakers have finally settled on at least a temporary starting lineup until they potentially make a move. But over this stretch, they insert Max Christie. That group of AD, LeBron, Rui, Max, and Austin. Lakers are 5-2 when they play, 4-1 when they start together. That group is plus 26 in 76 minutes. Already the second most played lineup on the Lakers, which kind of shows like how much tinkering there's been with the rotation. But quickly here on the numbers, 107.1 offensive rating, which would be 29th in the NBA over the full course of the season. So bad offensively, really bad. But they make up for that with a 92.8 defensive rating, which would be the best in the league by almost 10 points per 100 possessions. And they have a plus 14.3 net rating, which is elite mark. That's like the type of net rating you want with a starting lineup. I don't think that's sustainable at that level, but they've looked pretty good together. Why do you think this group has worked so well?
I mean, I think, they needed a burst of energy, athleticism, and defense in that starting lineup. And I think that was always the plan. I think that's why they paid Max this summer. I think the hope was that they didn't trade for a 3-and-D wing, but they kind of were trying to like bring up their own 3-and-D wing through the ranks. And then he just had a really rough start to the season, which, I think if he had more run time last year, he probably would have been able to work through some of those kinks in a slightly lower stakes environment, maybe without being a starter. Like to go from basically being essentially out of the rotation completely to in the starting lineup is like quite a jump for anyone, even a talented player. So I think because he got off to such a rough start, the problem with the Western Conference is that there's not really margin for error for anyone. And you don't really have time to give a 20-year-old, time to develop, 21-year-old time to develop for a few weeks in the beginning of the season, because that might cost you, that might be the difference between being in the play-in and the playoffs at the end of the year. Like that's how small these margins are. So I think Max, developing into the player that he's becoming is huge. And also just like, I mean, LeBron has been a lot better on defense the last few weeks, but I just think it's really unrealistic to ask him to play like a true 3-4 on the defensive end every single night at 40 years old. It's just not, for 82 games, it's just not sustainable. So you have to have someone in there that's like switchable and can guard LeBron's guy sometimes when he takes a possession off or two, which I know is like a point of contention with a lot of fans, but it's just going to have to happen if he's also the engine of your offense, or one of the engines.
Obviously, Max wasn't playing like this to start the season, but they've needed this positional archetype. Like I think he's become a true 3-and-D wing, and we'll see if it's sustainable, right? And it's been several weeks at this level, but of course he still got 52 plus games left. But we'll just throw in Max now because that was going to be one of the later storylines, and I think these two kind of go hand in hand. But looking at it over his last 10 games, 10 points a game, shooting over 40% on threes. he's doubled his free throw rate this season, which I think has been a sneaky improvement in his game of just getting to the free throw line, being better at attacking closeouts and just his decision making. And honestly, at times it's kind of funny. I feel like he gets a better whistle than like LeBron and AD.
Don't even get me started.
Feels like he's added some Austin to his game in terms of like drawing kind of
really
being an
has.
expert at drawing contact and I don't want to say selling it because that's kind of a pejorative, but like you do gotta sell the contact a bit, and it's worked for him. Lakers defense has been 7 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor over the past 10 games. Like this is what the Lakers have needed, right? And he's making smart decisions offensively. He's reduced some of the indecision and some of those. He'd have the dribble the ball off his foot, turnover, or kind of forcing a pass or something, and he'll occasionally still get that. But I think he's simplified and just sort of reduced his responsibilities. They're not having him run like pick and rolls as much and try and be more of a ball handler, like off the dribble scorer.
Don't dribble,
but he's like I think his defense against Ja, his defense against De'Aaron Fox. I've been just really encouraged by this stretch from Max, and it is. I would even say he's kind of exceeded my expectations a little bit with this recent stretch, and is a little bit more ahead of schedule than I thought he'd be at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think, this is, again, this is kind of this is like, I wouldn't say the ceiling, but maybe the ceiling for this year of what they were hoping that he would be. That it kind of just speaks to how topsy-turvy up and down the season's been, because Max looked unplayable at times. Now he looks like he absolutely belongs in the starting lineup. Dalton looked like rookie of the year, like shooting the lights out, couldn't miss. Now, he's having some shooting struggles, although he looked pretty good in the Christmas Day game. So I do empathize with JJ in the sense of like, no one has been super consistent all year long, really, on this lineup. So that's a challenging task for a coach to figure out who to play when players look so wildly different week to week. But I do think like the people
game
in
to
the
game,
roles,
honestly.
Game to game, literally. I mean, and Gabe
Quarter to
Vincent
quarter.
remembered how to shoot threes quarter to quarter. God, not an easy job. He knew it wasn't going to be an easy job though when he signed up for it. But yeah. So, but I think for now, so it almost feels like a jinx to say like, wow, Max Christie like is having an incredible season. Like he really became the player we wanted him to be. Just before something drops off a cliff or something like that. But to what we've seen right now, he looks awesome. I'm happy for him because I know that, that was a struggle to get that opportunity and then have it taken away so quickly. So it's cool to see him thriving. And yeah, they just need like 3 more Max Christies, in my opinion, on the trade market, or at least one more.
Not easy to find. So let's talk about the offense, because we just touched on starting lineup 29th in offense over the stretch. That is a team-wide trend where the Lakers offense has fallen off a cliff recently.
Yep.
So looking at it, first 20 games, they had a 115.3 offensive rating, 7th best in the NBA. So top 10 offense, that's where you want to be. And I think in line with the potential for this group. Last 10 games, 104.8 offensive rating. That is nearly 11 point per 100 possession decrease, 29th in the NBA. Yeah. And if you look at the numbers, assists have dropped from 11th over the first 20 games to 23rd. Turnovers from 3rd to 23rd. That's the biggest one to me, is like they took really good care of the ball. They've declined in that sense. But 3-point attempts, they're attempting fewer, they're making less. Free throw line, they went from the team in the league attempting the most free throws per game to now 13th. Free throw percentage has kind of been stable. But what stands out to you with some of those numbers and just what you've made of the Lakers' offensive struggles recently? And do you think it's just kind of fluky, like some of the shooting, it feels like it can't get much worse than it's currently been? Or is there something kind of more fundamental there that they need to address potentially with trades, or just continuing to kind of tinker and reshuffle the rotation?
I mean, I don't think it's fluky in the sense that I think it makes sense that if you're expending this much energy on the defensive end to try and turn your defense around from being bottom 3 in the league to top 10, that you might not have the legs for jump shots. Like that math is mathing for me. Also, like to your point, this is a pretty one-way roster. So for the players that are more offensive-minded players by nature, that are trying to turn it around and become defensive stalwarts out of nowhere, like that is not natural to them and takes a ton of effort. And obviously they're playing more of their defensive-minded players more minutes to try and fix the defense. So that obviously is going to have an impact as well. I do think the turnovers stands out. To me, it's just this is like a plot twist I did not see coming in this roller coaster season. Like I never thought that the offense would be the issue, just because they've pretty consistently in this era been a really good offense. I mean, they've had their struggles with defense, but offense has been pretty consistent, especially those sort of like free throw, like paint numbers. Like they can get to the basket, they can get to the free throw line. Like the threes might fall, they might not. That's always been an issue for them. They don't have a ton of 3-point specialists on the team, but getting a basket has never really been their problem. So that's a little alarming to me, but I do my theory is that if they had more two-way players on the roster and they weren't having to expend as much effort on the defensive end just to be a competent defense, it would maybe, self-correct a little bit.
I think there's a lot that has gone into this stretch, and I'd be interested to see what this conversation looks like 10 games from now. I mean, is there a trade that happens potentially? But also just, so they played Minnesota twice. Minnesota has absolutely just destroyed them in terms of they've had 20 plus turnovers in both those games, and they've really struggled with their ball pressure. They also played the Pistons, who they've struggled also. Like the turnovers have almost been, they've been playing some athletic teams that are good with ball pressure, and that is a clear weakness with this group. But that's also not all of the other 29 teams. That's only I think a handful of them that can really be disruptive on that level. The problem is I think several of those teams are teams they probably have to go through to get to a championship. I think you look at that. You also look at LeBron missed a couple games. Austin missed 4 games in this stretch of 10. And it's been a real point of emphasis with the coaching staff in terms of the rotation. If you look at it, it has been inserting Max, more Cam, more Gabe, less D'Lo on the nights that he's not been as effective offensively, less Dalton with the month-long stretch that he's month-long slump, that he's had. I would also posit that like AD has been less involved, and he was someone who like AD is averaging less than a point more than Austin over this stretch, which
that's
I find
problem.
I think that's a kudos to Austin and how well he's been playing, but also AD shouldn't be averaging 20 points a game over a 10-game stretch. Like that needs to be 25 plus. So I think the offense is going to be fine. I would like to see more threes. I'm getting close to the point of just giving up on that dream. I don't think.
So is JJ, I think.
I mean, they've been again, first 20 games, 25th in 3-point attempts, last 10, 29th. So they've been a bottom 6 team in terms of 3-point volume all season. It just kind of is what it is. That's not the makeup of this group. I do think it's an important thing that like would raise their ceiling if they could figure out a way to generate better threes. But I digress. But let's flip it to the other side of the ball though, because that's been the positive development during this stretch where Lakers defensive improvement. So first 20 games, 116.9 defensive rating, 26th in the NBA. So bottom 5 defense over the first 20 games. Last 10, 110.1, 14th. But then if you look at the last 7, which includes part of that break that they had and LeBron missing the first game of that stretch, 104.7 defensive rating, 3rd best in the NBA. So frankly, a ceiling I did not see with this group defensively.
Not at all.
And I went through the lineup data. Rui, Christian Coloco, AD, and Max have been making the biggest impact from a defensive perspective. I think AD's been better. JJ's talked about challenging him and just saying like, doesn't matter how well everyone else is defending. If you're not engaged and locked in and like being the all world disruptor that you can be, it doesn't really matter how hard people are trying to get around screens or switch or box out or whatever. Like you need to be AD defensively. Max, Cam, and Gabe, I think have been more the banshees that JJ has referenced them as. I think they've slotted Austin, D'Lo, and Dalton a little bit more appropriately in terms of taking more off of those guys' plates defensively. So how does this recent stretch with this group defensively change your perception of them or your view of their ceiling?
I mean, in a sense, I guess it raises their ceiling because I just never thought this many like one-way offensive players would be able to play this level of defense. But it's costing. That's the thing is like I don't want to be a negative, on this positive takeaway or whatever. But like it's costing them their offense kind of, and the offense is kind of what they hang their hat on historically. So I don't know how excited I can be about it if they haven't been able to do both at once. Like it would be one thing if they could be at least like middle of the pack on both. And then, you hope that the offense can raise up a little bit and maybe the defense take a little dip, but they'll both stay somewhere around the middle. But they've kind of just seesawed between having one of the worst defenses in the league and one of the best offenses, one of the worst offenses and one of the best defenses. They've never really both been middle of the pack at the same time. So I would withhold my optimism until the offense can sort of regress to the mean a little bit, I think.
I trust that this group has enough offensively long-term to be a top 10 offense. But if you could get a couple more defensive pieces and add Vando back, then all of a sudden, I think you have a chance to be top 10 in both. And that historically is the way you win a championship. So I would say this is maybe more cautiously optimistic with the defense in a way that like I think they've shown a ceiling that I didn't think they could get to for like a sustained amount of time. Now it has come at the cost of the offense. So like if it is going to be a one or the other thing, I kind of think this group looked better when they were leaning into the offense and that 10-4 start and some of the wins that they had. And like, I do think this group trends more offensively than defensively, but we'll see, right? I think part of it comes down to like, what do they want the vision to be and how do they shape that with whatever trades that they end up making? I had a feeling we were not going to get to all 10 storylines because especially with the trade stuff, LeBron, the starters, like we're going to dive into all that. But I want to close with this one on Austin. And I think his importance to the group because I think a lot of chatter, a lot of conversation about the number 3 guy on the team and just Austin and his value and whether he's living up to that number 3 billing or not. But looking at the numbers and just, I will say, I will preface all this with like, he did not play in the Minnesota and Miami games. So that certainly is going to affect the plus minus and the on off because that was, they lost by 71 points. I would also say that shows to some extent Austin's value. And so he missed 4 games in this stretch. They went 1-3 without him. They're 4-2 with him during the stretch. He's averaging 19, 6 and 6 on 43, 36, 89 shooting splits. He leads the team in plus minus, plus 40 in 210 minutes. They are 24.9 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. That is a wild swing. The only player slightly ahead of him is Rui at just under 26 points per 100 possessions. He's third in scoring by almost 6 points a game, right there, less than a point, but below AD. And I think he had the best performance by a non-AD / LeBron player this season with that triple-double and game winner on Christmas Day in Golden State. So to me, he remains their third best player. Clearly, I think it's indisputable. You could make the case if you slot him at number 4 and bring in a better number 3, like that makes the Lakers even stronger. But I don't think that's a requirement. I think it could just be bolstering, as you said earlier, 4 through 6. But I just think he's a really good player. The Lakers want to keep him. I think they should keep him. And I think this stretch is really underlined how important Austin is to this group.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling Jason Timp the other day, like, nothing underscores how important Austin is to this Lakers team, like how they looked without him. I mean, I think that was just like as clear of evidence as you can possibly get that they desperately need what he brings to the table. He's sort of like a jack of all trades, master of none. Like he's really good at several different things, and he's such a floor raiser for them, I think, because he's going to bring a certain level of intensity of effort every single game, no matter what. He doesn't really waver on that. I think he's a really smart basketball player, so he'll make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but they're never going to be like or it's rarely, I should say, no one never makes dumb mistakes, but it's very rarely going to be like an, oh my God, Austin, what was that kind of mistake? You know, like he's a very smart player with high basketball IQ, and they need that desperately, you know, especially when LeBron's off the floor. Like he's kind of their only, I guess D'Lo is a pretty good like game manager type, but I think Austin is just so reliable and trustworthy, and LeBron trusts him so much. And I think that's really important because I think he's maybe the only non-AD player out there that I feel like LeBron really implicitly trusts. Like if you even look at that last play that was drawn up for LeBron was getting double teamed. He didn't look concerned that Austin had sort of unilaterally decided to go to the basket and try that layup. He was just getting there in case he missed it to try and get that offensive rebound. But he wasn't like throwing his hands up like, Austin, what are you doing? You know, like he trusts Austin with that last game winning shot. And I think that's super important for this team. So Austin's invaluable to them. He's also on, like, to me, one of the best contracts in the NBA. Makes like around $12 million, I think. And to be the third best player on a fringe contender, I guess you would say, for $12 million is bonkers. So yeah, he's really important to the Lakers. And if they trade him, it better be for like an absolutely like needle moving, insane. Like I can't even really think of a player off the top of my head that would move the needle enough to be worth trading him.
Yeah, like I co-sign everything you just said. I think there was kind of, I mean, maybe I'm sometimes too in the weeds with like the online discourse, but I just try to know what people are saying and what are some of the general sentiments of the fan base or just the NBA kind of online community at large. But I feel like there was a notion at one point that like he hasn't improved, and I just don't think that's accurate. Like I think maybe he had a little bit of a dip there where we had a good start, that then he had a couple weeks there where he wasn't quite himself, and I know he and JJ both talked about some of the conversations that they had that kind of got him through that. I think that first road trip was kind of when he slipped a little bit, but since then, I think he's been awesome. He's been even better since coming back from his injury. And yeah, I mean, 19-6-6 is like nothing to scoff at as a number 3 guy. Like that's in line with, I mean, that's better than his numbers last year. Even looking at it, like the triple double, I know it's people get triple doubles, but I think that the context of it was like, the Lakers really needed someone to rebound with no AD. And he was in there skying and boxing out guys. And like, just, he's never afraid to get his hands dirty, to get hit in the face. It's kind of an elbow and fist magnet. Like I think he does a lot of like role player things really well, but then he also
can take the big shot. And
like no D'Lo in that game. So they did need him to step up offensively, and he did step up offensively, but was also doing other things like, he ran the offense more, and he was battling in the paint and for rebounds more. So like, I just think there's so much versatility to his game. Like JJ's talked about him being one of the few guys on the team that actually plays north-south and penetrates and gets into the paint, gets to the rim, can draw contact. He thinks that the free throw decrease is largely been because Austin was out for a stretch. So, I just think it felt like the Christmas, even without the Christmas Day performance, a lot, like all this stuff would ring true. But I think that was like a nice reminder of Austin's value in just how good he actually is.
Yeah, and on the biggest, most national stage possible. So good for him.
Yeah, it's a nice way to cap the 10 storylines. We'll say 7 storylines in 10 games. The other 3 were Gabe, who's been shooting better, but the on-off has been rough. Some lineup data stuff of like some combinations, which we could get to at a later point, and just Lakers standing in the West, kind of where they are in the hierarchy, which, as I noted earlier, Dallas now looking, like they're going to take a slide in the standings, and it's like they're right there with Denver. Memphis, Houston, and OKC have distanced themselves, so it feels like maybe the 4 seed is the ceiling for now, but Lakers could be the 4 seed by next week, and it wouldn't be that crazy. So things are tentatively trending in the right direction.
Cautiously trending up.
We'll remind people that in this 10-game stretch, we had Miami, Minnesota, and Atlanta, and we also had Golden State, Sacramento, and Memphis. So who knows with this team? That's kind of the point. You said, as AD said, like they could beat anybody, they could lose to anybody. That's the gift and the curse of this year's Lakers team. But
Yes.
Claire, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for hopping on the show for the first time. It's long overdue, and I'm glad we made it happen. And I think this was a really good episode. For the people who do not follow you, where can they find you and your work?
Yeah, I had so much fun. Thanks for having me. You can find me across all social media, like any, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, whatever. It's just at Claire MPLS. And I write for theguardian.com, and you can find my work there as well.
Awesome. Well, make sure you check out Claire's work and you follow her on all social platforms. And that will do it for today's episode. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope you all had good Christmas, good holidays with your friends and family and loved ones. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back Saturday night after the Lakers-Kings game here in Los Angeles. I will talk to you then.